Good morning. Welcome to today's live. As usual, let's do some comp test and get some housekeeping out of the way. This is being broadcasted via StreamYard. So, depending on where you're coming from, it may ask you for permission to share your name. Feel free to do that. All that means is when you leave a comment, we'll be able to see your name. If you don't want to share your name, not a problem. We'll still be able to see your comments. Secondly, Facebook, YouTube, LinkedIn, if people could just give me the thumbs up, just so I can see that you can hear me okay, see me okay, and so forth. Um, okay, I'm beginning to see people log in. So, okay, I'm going to give everybody just a couple more seconds before we get going. So, first of all, apologies. I haven't done a live, feels like in a while. And the truth of the matter is, I've been traveling, which is amazing, right? So it feels amazing to be traveling again, back out there. And in many ways, it just feels like going back to normality. So, but we will start coming back regularly. So, okay, I can see people logging in now. So let's get going. So today, what we're going to talk about is remote working. Now, in many ways, this is a topic that has been covered a billion times. But certainly from what I'm seeing from the recruitment perspective and having a global client base, there's still that rub. So I decided today I was going to talk to my guest today, Catherine, who I'll bring in shortly. We're going to talk about the way forward. But not only that, and I don't want to give away too much, but she actually made the decision as a senior executive to move out of the city. She happens to was in Calgary and she moved out. So we're going to talk about how, even as an executive, how that's impacted her. So without further ado, let's bring Catherine in. Hey,
Good morning.
how you doing?
I'm doing great. How are you?
Good. Yeah, good. Thanks. First of all, thank you for joining us. Now,
You.
you probably don't need an intro, but for those people in the audience that don't know you, if you could just give everybody just a quick overview of who you are.
Yeah, absolutely. So I've been in the recruitment industry for over 22 years, which is kind of scary to think about that. I have done everything from, corporate recruiting, agency recruiting, HR. I've actually worked in the US as well. So kind of been all over the place. And in my current role, I oversee business development and global marketing for energy resourcing. And yeah, I fell into this industry like a lot of people, and I'm grateful. I'm grateful. It's super dynamic and ever changing, as you know. So yeah,
Yeah,
that's
I
awesome.
actually think it should be promoted as a structured career through colleges and things like that. But you know what? That's another life for
That's another
another
topic.
day, right? So let's dive straight in because I'm mindful of time.
Mhm.
Um, Now you made the move from Calgary,
I
so
did.
let's start with why did you make that decision, especially in your role?
Yeah,
Why did you decide, you know what, I'm leaving a major hub?
absolutely. So, I think for me, looking at what was happening in the world, I started thinking about, is this a good opportunity to change up my lifestyle? And I grew up as a kid going to the Okanagan, and I fell in love with it. And I always thought, oh, one day I will retire in the Okanagan. And then I started thinking about housing prices in the Okanagan and thought, what if I made the leap now instead of waiting till I retire? What if we enjoy it and kind of seize the moment? And so my role changed. I used to oversee operations for Canada. And when my role moved into more of a North American global perspective, I had that conversation with my leader who's in Australia and had a really open conversation. What do you think about me moving a province over? Is that something that you think would be workable? And without hesitation, he was very supportive. I was kind of surprised. I didn't expect it to be such an easy conversation, but Yeah, he was super supportive, and I am definitely an outlier in the organization. I'm the only one that works outside of a hub, so to speak. But that being said, I'm only 4 hours away from Vancouver. I'm an hour, well, not even an hour flight to Calgary, and so I have been making, the effort to go back and forth. And that's something that we both talked about as well. That I wanted to remain connected to the team in Calgary.
Excuse me. So, okay, so let me ask you this. You made the move. Do you regret it? And actually, just a double barrel question. Do you regret it? And how has that actually impacted your relationships with your colleagues, your peers, your executive, right? So sort of like that.
Absolutely.
How's that played out?
I don't regret the move in the sense that we absolutely love it here. I mean, anyone that comes to visit adores the region. Do I miss my coworkers? Do I miss, the camaraderie of the office environment? Absolutely. But I would say even that's changed. That dynamic is so different now because, quite frankly, a lot of the people that I work with aren't even physically working in the office. So it's still very much a remote working organization. And I think because of the nature of the fact that we are a global company and I liaise with a lot of my colleagues on a global scale, to be honest with you, the remote working, it actually really works for my schedule. I think if I had to go into an office, there's times where I do 5 a.m. calls. If I had to, be on a call at 5 a.m. in the office somewhere, that would be very challenging. So I don't have any regrets. I do miss my coworkers, and I do, I think the biggest thing that I miss is that collaboration. And when I would, get together with my colleagues and we would whiteboard an idea or we would brainstorm. So I think, we're looking at ways that, how do we try to stay connected with each other? I have traveled back to Calgary about 4 times. And when I go, I make a point of meeting up with my colleagues and, we do have a social and things like that. And I think the plan is that later this year, we're all going to get together as a North American team. And
Mhm.
the Canadian folks are going to go down to Houston. So we are looking at
One of
ways.
the things we've been talking about just as a team and on the coaching side with my clients, what people are missing is that active listening part. When you're in an office, you're doing whatever it is you're doing, but you're still actively listening. You're turning around, you hear something, um, and I guess it's going to depend on what level of experience you've got, but that's something that I'm seeing certainly companies are having difficulty replicating. We are ourselves. We've
Yes.
just hired an individual in Montreal for our team. And one of the things that I'm thinking of is, okay, so how do we get that active listening? How do we, for lack of a better word, compensate for that active listening part, right? Now, let me ask you this. We talked about it's worked well for you. How actually has your company supported you? And more so, because one of the things, if you look on LinkedIn, it's like, okay, so now if companies want people to come to the office, the expectation is a companies should be paying for that individual. You and I were talking about this when we were preparing for today's call. It's one thing if, as an employer, they've asked you to relocate, but when you made that choice and they supported your choice to relocate, doesn't matter whether you're 4 hours away, 2 hours away,
Mhm.
who should cover that cost of travel?
It was something that I had to really kind of think about because at first I'm like, okay, well, I initiated this and I'm like, well, yeah, but if I'm going back to Calgary and it's for business, should they compensate my flights? And, so there was a bit of a conversation there and just, a bit of a negotiation, I would say. And so, looking at, the big picture of everything, I think that it needs to be something that is shared as a cost. So I typically I cover my flights back and forth between Calgary and Penticton. And if there's a client meeting or there's a get together, then that's something that's covered by my company. And so So that was kind of, something that was agreed upon when we started thinking about, okay, how is this actually going to work? They made the decision to, let me relocate. And then, some of these questions kind of came up after the fact. It's like, oh yeah, I've got to think about that. How is that going to work? So yeah, I mean, it's a compromise, and I don't think that the onus should be entirely on one or the other. And it depends on the organization and their approach to that. But
But I think I certainly like one day COVID was here, and certainly that's how it feels like, and everybody had to pivot. And then social media, it creates a frenzy, right? And
Mhm.
all you were hearing was, oh yeah, remote, people are never going to return to office. This is a new way forward. Then I remember thinking at the time, really, what's going to happen to all the empty offices downtown? Because yes, whilst the offices are empty, what about the restaurants, the hotels? um and I think I said this to yourself yesterday. Tourism, when tourism was going to come back, because who wants to come to Toronto if it's dead,
Right.
right? People are wanting to come back to cities that are buzzing, so to
Yeah.
speak, right? So now Toronto, it's getting there, in all honesty. But so one of the things I think, to your point, we didn't do at the time was say, let's seriously look at this. Let's really look at this. Is this really going to be 100% remote, right? And I
Yeah.
think, as I said, it was just, I mean, just look at LinkedIn,
Oh,
right? So if your boss doesn't let you work remotely, move, kind of thing, right? Dump your boss. Your boss is terrible, kind of thing, right? Um, but also, I think, playing devil's advocate, those individuals that did choose to move, right,
mhm.
relocate off their own choice. If your employer got you to take, you negotiated a salary cut in order to be able to do that, then I think it's only fair that the employer pays for all the commute,
Right.
right?
Yeah. For
Because
sure.
yeah, because if you think about it, in pre-pandemic world, when we're negotiating salary is X, and then there's that part that covers cost of travel, covers cost of subway, whatever it is you're going to have
Yeah.
for lunch. It's just
Yeah.
whatever that number varies, right? So my kind of personal take on it is, well, if your company said, okay, hold on, we're taking that money away
Yeah.
because you're now moving, then I personally think companies should be paying for everything. But
Yeah.
if they didn't do that, and to the best of my knowledge, um, most companies didn't do that, then I don't think it's fair that the company should be expected to pay for everything, pay for all the travel.
Exactly. And I think that's what, it's something that just I think companies have to start thinking about, what is the impact? And if they do it for one, then, what if other people want to start doing that? And I'm thinking that there's probably a lot of companies that don't have necessarily a remote working policy in place, even, or a relocation policy. Or so I think that, companies need to start thinking about those sorts of things. And it's not a one size fits all in my mind.
Mm,
It's hard to just have a hard and fast, I think this is what we're doing for all roles. I think it does depend on the type of position. And you mentioned the fact that, you know, you're missing out on that active listening piece. I think for people entering the recruitment industry, it is a huge missed opportunity. I agree. I think, after spending time with some of my colleagues that I work with that have grown and developed over the last 7 years, a lot of the training and development, the feedback that I've received is we've learned so much just from listening
mm,
to conversations. And so I do think that's a huge challenge that companies are going to face. So I really do think it's sort of level dependent on whether or not you can work remotely 100%. And I think companies need to look at, accountability, and are they, meeting their KPIs, and are they meeting expectations, or, is their work being affected because they are working remotely, or is the team being impacted? In my role, I do oversee a few folks, and I try to make sure that we connect, a few times a week. We have one-on-ones, we have team calls, we have updates. I go out to, to Calgary. I've offered to have them come out and visit and things like that. So I think it just requires a real focused effort on how do I retain and remain, like, how do I remain connected to the
Yeah,
folks that
because
I
one
work
of
with?
the challenges I've got, and I haven't got a way forward on it yet, well, not quite clear in my mind anyhow, is we've got our internal graduate program starting. And the piece that I am still trying to map out in my mind is exactly that, that act, the rookie, the people that have never worked in staffing, that active listening part. And then, but yeah, you're right, because somebody like yourself, doesn't matter where you're working, you've got the experience in the, we're talking staffing now. So let me ask you this then. We talked about the cost of travel and who should cover that. Something we're seeing, again, I'm sticking with LinkedIn, expectation that companies should now be paying your utilities bill. I'm a firm believer company needs to make sure you've got the equipment to work from home and you're set up for success, 100%. But I'm reading, well, they should be covering my utilities bill. They should be covering this and they should be covering that. Um, I'll say it. I disagree with that because you're warming your house, you're cooling your house regardless, right? And again, it's a choice you're making. What
Yeah.
are your thoughts on that? Just those others, like every day it seems to be like there's something new,
Yeah. I know.
right? And at the end of the day, companies are not, they're not for profit, they're profit making. So
Yeah,
when money goes out over here, something has to give. It comes out of another pot, right?
exactly.
So, have you had those kind of conversations? Have you heard from
Yeah.
what some of your clients are doing?
Yeah. No, it's a great question. And it was something that we were really scrutinizing, I'd say probably, a year ago, really talking about, okay, do we need to have a policy about this? Do we need to have some sort of a work from home credit? Ultimately, we landed on no. So we don't subsidize anyone's internet or things like that. And I think that, for many of those reasons that you just kind of listed, I think, depending on the role, obviously people can, you know, expense certain things. Our
Yep,
company, if you're in business development or if you're in a leadership role, they do subsidize, people's cell phones already.
yep,
One thing that I do think companies need to be aware of, though, and mindful of, and it's easy to kind of forget about it when you're working remotely, is the ergonomics. So it's something that we try to do, a couple times a year, is have a little bit of let's do a check-in. What's your desk setup like? Do you have, an ergonomic keyboard? What about your mouse? Are you sitting in your desk? Are you sitting in your dining room still 2 years later?
that's
Because
actually a good point.
there's a lot of folks that are still doing that. And I think out of that, we have to think about from a WCB perspective, are we going to have injuries? Are we going to have carpal tunnel situations, all sorts of things like that? So I worry more about, people's like their physical well-being from that perspective. So I think if companies are going to subsidize anything, it's okay, is there a little bit of a sit stand, desk or something that they can put on their existing desk to help them with those types of things. So I think that's what we need to start looking at.
I think that's a fantastic point, right? So just to go down a little bit of a rabbit hole over here off the back of what you just said in an interview process, right? Especially if you're now saying, yeah, going to work from home. I'll ask, do you have a place to, do you have an area to work? Most people say yes, right? Most people are going to say yes, right?
Right.
So then it becomes, and as you're saying that, whilst I love the idea, I love what you just said, I was thinking, hmm, invasion of privacy. Are people really going to want to talk about that kind of stuff to their employers? And I guess it comes back, I'm going to answer my own question, comes back to let them tell you as much as they're comfortable with, right? The
Yeah.
so from if I'm understanding you correctly, we need to ask whether they choose to volunteer that information or not. That is up to them.
Yeah. I mean, I think that, if people are going to be working from home, that space needs to be set up adequately. And so, we do an ergonomic assessment, like I said, a couple times a year. And it's not super intensive, but it's those really basic things. And it's amazing what comes out of that. It's like, yeah, I'm not really working at my desk. I'm sitting on my couch with my laptop and I'm in front of my TV and then you just start thinking like, how productive are they? Are they, set up for success? Do they have the right equipment? And a lot of people that I've been working with, they don't necessarily have a dedicated room. So it's challenging. And then of course, folks with kids, like with young kids, it's difficult, right? So
Yeah, it's interesting. I was with a client in England last week, or was it the week before? Week before, and he was saying he's got his dedicated office. Now he's a senior executive. He's got his dedicated office, and he said he got sick of that office, and just for change of scenery, for the last couple of months, he's been working on the island in the kitchen just to get that change of scenery, right?
yes,
And it's true because you do get to that stage. You're like, okay, and let's change it up a little bit. So let
yeah,
me ask you my next question. Um, with what do you think companies are going to do, or what do you think your company is going to do moving forward on this work from home? Because we're starting to see, as with a client yesterday, they are going, all new hires are being told, yes, there's an element of hybrid today,
just once.
but so go on.
The beauty of having cats.
That's okay. But what they said is people are going to have to come back to the office. So anybody we're hiring for that particular company, we're saying, look, it's hybrid right now, but they are expecting to go back 100% to the office. And I'm starting to see that a little more and more. So we've had
Yes.
all this whole movement to, oh my God, get rid of your office, 100% remote working, way forward.
Yeah.
Then it became this day or two in the office. Now I'm seeing companies come back and say 100% in the office because, generalizing sweeping statement, I'll only speak for the companies that I'm speaking for, they're finding the productivity isn't there. Now, again, I'm speaking for the recruitment space
Yes.
because that's my area of expertise. Maybe
Yeah.
different in other industries. But what's been your experience?
It's funny because I was just on a call with a client yesterday, and their company stance was, yeah, no, we're like, everyone's got full flexibility. If they want to come in, great. If they don't, that's okay too. Um, but what was interesting is we asked her, so like, what do you prefer? What do you like? She's like, oh, I'm way more productive in an office. And so that was just interesting. And I think, that's what it's coming down to. It's really about, I think, companies giving employees the opportunity to set themselves up for success. I have a lot of colleagues that their preference is to work from an office. They miss the camaraderie. Sorry, I have a cat that's trying to get into the
That's
screen
okay.
here. I'm just going to put her down.
Yeah, joy of working from home, right?
Exactly.
2 years ago, that wouldn't have happened,
I know,
right?
I know. She's incessant. But I think that, yeah, it's about, just give me 1 second here. Oh my goodness. I should have taken her out. Sorry about that. So yeah, 2 years ago, I think that, it's about setting people up for success. And not everyone works from home really well. And at the same time, if there's project work, or I like, from my own perspective, if I've had to really focus on things on the marketing side of things and I need to do writing, or I need to be super creative and just be in my head, I like to be at home. But I do like that collaboration piece with colleagues. In fact, we were just talking about it on a leadership call yesterday. And a colleague of mine, we were trying to kind of map out a new structure for business development on a global scale. And we've had probably 6 to 8 sessions virtually. And we both agreed, wouldn't this have just been so much easier if we would have just flown somewhere in the world, gotten together, and hashed this out in 2 days? So I think there is productivity loss for sure. Absolutely. Working from home 100% of the time, I think that there are missed opportunities. So I think it's a matter of us trying to figure out, okay, if I need to collaborate with someone and I really need to hash something out, how do we make it work? Can we meet in person somewhere? Can we compromise? How do we get together and actually get this work done? So I do think that, it has to be a compromise.
Yeah, and I think there's also the element of managing differently,
Yes.
right? Because there, we'd it's unfair to say, oh, well, it's all down to the individual. There's that management, it's that clear the usual stuff. Some of the things that certainly whilst in lockdown, I was coaching on my in the coaching practice was getting on the when people are on the phone, right? So your sales time. And in the office, you'd have, like, for lack of a better word, a power hour, right?
Yeah.
So I kind of got all my clients to implement, just go on Teams, put everything on mute, and just trying to replicate, because you could be having nobody could be answering your call, and you look up and someone's having, someone seems to be having a great conversation,
Yes.
right? So, but again, it does not replace, it certainly doesn't replace. But I think
No.
it's equally important that as employees, we recognize that, what, ultimately, we have to deliver,
Yes.
right? We have to deliver. In our world, we're salespeople, right? So it's revenue. Someone else might have, in technology, might be a project that they've got to get out on X period of time. In the finance world, I don't know, run payroll, get cash in, whatever the case may be, right? So there's a certain level of expectation that doesn't matter whether you're working from home or not. If you are not meeting those clear expectations, your employer's going to have to let you go, because
Yeah.
then it's starting to damage the business. It's starting to hurt the business, your colleagues and peers. So I think
Yeah.
there is an element of taking responsibility and accountability as individuals. But the other thing, again, I want to sidetrack, and you and I were talking about this yesterday. What are your thoughts on individuals that are coming into the workforce? Because if you think about it, for the last 18 months, 2 years, whatever it is, I've lost track of time. Um, People that were going to graduate, then go on, come into the workplace, offices, that social dynamic piece, right? Um, in other words, our leaders of tomorrow. There's
Yeah.
this vacuum that's happened over the last 2 years.
100%.
Right? And I'm seeing it, and when I'm talking to these individuals, I'm seeing the gap. There's this almost nervousness,
Hmm.
right? It's almost, and I've seen it in experienced people as well, and adults as well, almost kind of forgotten how to be in a team, how to be out there.
Yeah.
And I know a lot of people are gonna be like, what the hell are you talking about?
No, it's
But it's
true.
true.
It's very true. And I think, yeah, we were talking about this, the fact that, especially like the millennials, they lost, a couple years. And, from a social perspective and from a mentorship, from a development piece, you talked about that active listening. I think it's super critical. I don't think that it would be really, I don't think you would be setting, somebody up for success by letting them work 100% remotely. Uh, I think that it has to be more of that hybrid model for those types of folks that are coming in that are new to the working world, that need more hands-on leadership, or there has to be an arrangement where there's a commitment for people to get together, whether that's at a dedicated space where they can collaborate and they've got dedicated learning time. But as I said before, I think there's a lot to be gained from that active listening piece, just from watching and listening. And that is a huge thing that you don't necessarily get when you're working remotely, for sure.
Yeah. And what are some of the things that graduates, that these individuals that have, I mean, they've lost the most, in many, many ways,
Yes.
right? Over the last 2 years. What is some of your advice to those individuals watching this and they're like, yeah, I'm nervous. I've lost 2 years. I've been at home. I'm nervous coming back, especially when they're out interviewing. Now,
Yes.
it's our role, our duty of care to, I don't want to use the word make allowances, but be mindful of that, right?
Mhm.
Make the interview process, for lack of a better word, as comfortable as possible. But
Yes.
ultimately, the individual needs to do some work as well in
Yep.
order to self prepare. So, what is your advice to somebody that's just like, okay, I graduated 2 years ago, haven't got a job, nervous about getting into, going out interviewing. What's some of your advice to them?
Yeah. That's a great question. I think there's lots of things. I mean, first of all, and it's just my own personal philosophy, maybe it's a little bit of a dreamer philosophy, but I think, all too often I've seen situations where, people entering the workforce or they've just graduated university or college and they're pursuing roles that they think they should be pursuing because their parents told them that you need to go into banking or you need to
Yep.
be or really need to get some more schooling because you should become a lawyer like your brother or something like that. Ultimately, in my mind, success comes from passion, from loving what you do. Now, does everyone get to do what they want in life? Not necessarily, but I think there has to be an element of interest. So, my advice would be curious. If you're curious about something, if you're like, oh my God, Bitcoin, that's like the coolest thing ever, get excited about it, learn more about it. Because oftentimes I've seen people, they turn their hobbies or their interests, it becomes a side hustle or then it becomes a business or they get hired by someone because they saw them posting something on Instagram and they're like, oh my God, they're amazing, we need to hire that person as a content marketer. My other advice is like for people to really think about the massive opportunities that are out there. You mentioned that and of course it could be another LinkedIn live entirely, but the whole fact that talent acquisition, when I was in high school, HR wasn't even something like, it wasn't even talked about. Talent recruitment, I didn't even know it was a profession. And so I think that's true for a lot of folks kind of still coming out of school. There's just so much information out there. It can become really overwhelming and daunting to even know where to start. And so I think, for people to also find a mentor, if there's someone that they look up to that they think, I like that person. I like what they've done with their life. I want to emulate that. What did they do for a living? How did they become successful? I think kind of learning from people that they respect and admire and then figuring out, okay, what are the things that I want to do that I get excited about? So,
Yeah. I
yeah.
also want to talk about money, right? Because one of the things my clients, I'm hearing from my clients, is the salary expectations.
Mhm. Yeah.
Okay, being a little out of whack, right?
Yeah.
Because yeah, um, and again, that's an argument you can make for experienced people as well across all industry sectors and things like that. But that we seem to have gone through this period, I guess, of going to the highest bidder, then taking that bid and saying, okay, who's paying me the most type of thing, right? And oh, well, so and so over there got a job at X. Why can't I do it? Right.
Yeah.
Now, if it's equal par and things like that, 100% I totally agree.
Yeah.
Right. And if you are drastically underpaid, I agree. But I think that there's this balance coming, because again, I'll look at our industry. I
Yeah.
literally, as we were waiting for this to go live, as you know, I took a call from a client and he'd rung me for a reality check because he was speaking to somebody who that has very, very little industry experience, was asking him for $80,000. Yeah,
Wow.
$80,000, right?
Right.
Because They've seen an experienced person at $80,000. So, hey, I can do it. So I'll be $80,000 as well. So I think there is an onus on whether we're talking graduates, whether we're talking experience. Yes, there's always going to be somebody that's prepared to pay you more. 100% always happens,
Yeah.
right? Happened before COVID, just happens to be a lot more now. The expectations with that are tenfold.
They're massive. They're massive. And yeah, I've been hearing the same thing, that there's like very high expectations. I do think that people need to have a bit of a reality check. It's not sustainable. We saw it in oil and gas.
Yep,
We saw all these inflated salaries. And then, unfortunately, of course, lots of folks that have still been unemployed coming out of that market. And there's
yep,
still a lot of people out of that industry that are holding out hope that they're going to get, those big dollars again. I think that it's about transparency. There's been a lot of debate around, whether companies should publish their salary ranges. And I know in the US, of course, certain states are mandated to do that now. And we've got clients where we're like, okay, in this state, we actually have to publish the salary. And I think, from a, equity perspective, it's actually a great way to be transparent about it. But I think it's about looking at the big picture and thinking about how do we educate folks coming into the industry to say, this is your starting salary in this role, and this is where your career can take off. If you start out as an entry level recruiter for your first 1 to 3 years, here's what your base salary looks like. Here's what your potential commission could look like, based on your performance. And I think that, coming into agency recruitment specifically, we all know that, the amazing thing about it is that it's uncapped potential. For the most part, there may be
yep.
companies that have caps, but so I think that's where the energy and the excitement comes. And I think it's up to us to make sure that, we're communicating that with folks that are coming in. But then also looking at, what are the career streams? And that's something that we're looking at in our own organization. How do we attract talent coming in that, folks that don't have experience, but actually creating a talent map for them. So if they don't necessarily want to stay in recruitment, pardon me, how do they get into business development? How do they get into back office or operations? And what does that look like? And how can we set people up for success? Because our industry is notorious for turnover. We've all seen the good, the bad, and the ugly. There's some, great companies out there. There's some not so great companies out there. And so I think it's about being transparent up front, but also being realistic with people. And, my advice to the folks just chasing the money, follow your gut instinct. If you're just chasing the dollar, but you don't think you're aligned from a values perspective, and you don't think you're going to want to go to work or work with the people that you've interviewed with, you probably shouldn't take the job offer just because they're the highest bidder.
Yeah. And I totally agree with everything you've just said there. We talked our industry, pick it up, put it in technology, put it in finance, put it in whatever industry you want to put it. The same applies, right? Um, if it's too good to be true, it usually is.
It probably is. Yeah.
Yeah, right. And it's that expectation. Now, sales, it's really easy to measure, right?
Yes. Yeah.
X return on base salary, right? X multiplier. Um, but if you're not in sales, the expectation is still there. It's just wrapped in a different bow, right?
Yes.
Just want to see what this message says here. Flip side of that coin is most of our IT clients are contemplating board hiring policies offsetting the hire. That's actually,
Yes.
yeah, we're seeing that quite a bit as well. The
Yes.
offshoring model. What are your thoughts on that?
Oh, man. That opens up a whole can of worms.
Yeah,
I think it has its place. It's something that, as an organization, we're struggling. We have, like a lot of organizations right now, especially, in Australia and the UK, just massive hiring demands
yep,
and very little people.
yep,
I mean, it's a crazy, crazy market. And so we are exploring, do we look at bringing in an offshore sourcing team as a strategy to support our existing team so we don't burn them out.
Yep.
So I think an offshore model has its place, but I don't think anything replaces that inside knowledge that you have of your organization and your clients. As a recruiter, I think that's one of your main jobs, is to understand your clients so intimately that when you see a resume, you're like, oh my God, I have to present this resume, this candidate to my client because I know that they're a fit. You just know them so well. And I don't think that offshore organizations, they don't have that intimate knowledge. They're
Definitely.
sourcing, they're recruiting, they have, requisition lists and keywords. That can't replace that intimate knowledge of that client. That's my 2 cents.
I think just sticking with offshoring from a recruitment perspective, I've offshored to a company in the Philippines, and they do a phenomenal job. However, they take it so far. We pick it up from the contact phase, right? But
Yes.
leaving our industry aside, think of all where the call centers are.
Oh,
They're
for sure.
offshored. All right. You call your
Yep.
bank, you call, all that back office stuff,
Yes.
the companies have offshored. And it's a cost saving, right? It's a cost saving because we want, we don't like offshoring the work. We want to keep it here, but the salaries are so high and businesses can't afford it. So clients are putting so much pressure. So if I bring it back to our industry, because that's my area of expertise, clients are putting so much pressure on the margins here because they're really, really cheap. We're not for profits, right? Profit making businesses. So
Yeah.
how do you make that you have no choice but
Yeah.
to see how much of that work
Yes.
you can offshore.
Hmm.
And it's that client, it's that dominoes effect. End users, especially in technology, right? In technology companies, they and the banks, they want the cheapest possible resources,
Yeah.
right? You have two places you can take that from: the candidate's salary, which we don't. Just before anybody starts frantically
It's
typing,
a
what are you talking about?
misdemeanor. A lot of
Yeah,
people,
yeah,
yeah.
yeah.
A
We
lot of people,
don't. I'm just saying
yeah.
that's one place. And the other place is to say, okay, how do we now reduce our costs yet still be able to deliver a good
Mhm.
level of service? And that's where the
Yeah,
offshore piece comes in,
for sure.
right?
I've seen, yeah, it's a struggle because, yeah, from a cost perspective, for sure, there's huge gains to be made, and it has its place. But I think that there's a lot of challenges with it. I think that, one of the things that we pride ourselves on as an organization is, we say personalized white glove service. So, from a contract management, contract payroll perspective, our contractors, they're not dealing with a system or, somebody offshore. They actually get response from someone local in market that knows them by name, that actually has built relationships with
There's a
them.
cost to that. And we've just
There
said
is a
people
cost. Yeah.
salary costs are going up,
Yeah.
right? So, and if the clients, the margins are going down, again, any business,
Yeah.
we're talking
But
staffing, any business, right? Um, if a client is putting so much pressure on price,
hmm.
for you to deliver that level of service
Yeah.
and make a profit. Profit's not an evil word,
No,
right?
of course not. No,
It's you got to make profit.
gotta
That's
make
where the
profit. Yep.
reinvestment in the business comes and the economy and all the rest of it, right?
Yes.
So I think I personally speaking, there is room for an offshore model if used correctly,
Yes, I agree. I agree.
right?
And I think there's also an opportunity cost, though, because I think that if you're able to, prove your value and your worth, clients will see that, and I think they'll be willing to pay maybe that just a little bit extra for the level of service. But if price, again, it comes down to what is it that your client wants. If they're just super price conscious and that's their number one driver, then yeah, offshoring might be a good option. But I think that if we have a lot of clients that are, they demand that personalized service. They have, very specialized needs. They want to know that they're taken care of. They want to have that personal touch. There's a cost to that. So I think it comes down to, what's driving your client.
Yeah, yeah. So I'm just conscious of time. I got a couple
Yes,
more questions.
sure.
Um, what do you think companies need to do in order to not only retain but attract employees, given the current situation, the way the working model seems to be going? What would you say they need to do?
As we kind of talked before, I think that it's not a one size fits all. I think that, companies do need to be mindful of, the folks coming into the industry. What can they do to support them? Maybe that's more of that hybrid model. And, for more senior folks that maybe don't need to be in an office all the time, how do they support them? How are companies going to look at things from a big picture perspective? I think from an engagement piece, it's about getting people together, whether that's virtually or in person. I think part of it too, for us, one of the things that we used to be really involved in is corporate, social responsibility initiatives. So volunteering, going to the mustard seed and the drop-in center and, dress for success. And so I think it's about retaining those things. Okay, so we're working virtually, but that doesn't mean we can't all go down and meet up at those places.
Yep.
So I think that that's a big piece of it. We're seeing that, I just came out of a conference last week or the week before, and it was a marketing conference. But what was interesting about that, it was very focused on fulfillment, personal fulfillment. So I think companies need to start thinking about how can they create meaningful work for people. And it's more than just the paycheck and the work. It's about feeling connected to a greater cause.
I love that. And I think just to add on to that, absent leadership. There's so many companies that have had absent leadership for the last 2 years. Um, I was speaking to an executive when I was in England, and he runs a couple of regions in Asia Pac, and he was telling me that his predecessor, who he'd replaced, had made a lot of people redundant, done a lot of cost cutting, but also took 20 million in bonuses. Right now, 20 million in their currency, so I don't know what that equates to in pounds, and that's the absent leadership, right? And I'm seeing it more and more. Individuals are looking at it and saying, hang on a second, where's the leader been in the last 2 years?
Yeah.
You're asking me to come back to the office. When are you coming back to the office?
Yes. Yeah.
Right. So I think there is 100%. This can't be 5 days. And as I said, the client I was with yesterday, he's in the office himself 5 days a week.
Yes. Yeah.
Right. So
Absolutely.
and then that brings me to my final question. Do you think companies should force individuals that relocated to within a reasonable commute time to come back to the office?
I think, yeah, force is a
Okay,
strong
you
word,
to
right?
replace force with whatever, right? Highly,
I,
highly encourage.
yeah, exactly. Yeah, I think again, it's a conversation, and it's looking at the mix of employees, surveying, get feedback. I think companies might be surprised. Oh my goodness, like 80% of our staff wants to come back, so let's bring them back. Let's give them that opportunity to do that. And I think it comes down to how do we engage people? What's going to make them productive? If the majority of the workforce says, yeah, I'm way more productive in the office, bring them back. If there's folks that are like, you know what, I get way more done when I'm not in the office because I have a 2-hour commute and I'm using that 2-hour commute time to get more stuff done. And I mean, that's a whole other LinkedIn Live. We've seen a lot of burnout as a result, right? There's the other extreme of it where people are not shutting down.
Yeah.
Whether or not that creates more productivity, that's probably a whole other question. But
One other thing just to add on to that, I think I love your idea, do more surveys. And I know people say, oh, so we surveyed the living daylights out of something. But you know what? It's moving so fast, it's evolving so fast, right? So what even myself, what I thought 6 months ago is not. Like I'm loving travel. I'm absolutely
yes,
loving it, right? I got back last Tuesday and I'm on the 5:30 to the US this evening, right? And I'm gone for 2 weeks. I'm back for 2 weeks, then I'm gonna go. I love it, right? That's me. Somebody
yes.
else might not, because I'm a firm believer. I getting you want to meet your clients, your candidates, and all the rest of it. But I think there is also an element of when you do these surveys and people say, I'm really productive at home, I want to continue working from home, and you believe they're not, you got to have the checks and balance to be able to have that
Oh,
conversation.
100%. Yeah, just because someone says they are. I mean, you're gonna know from their work, and it's, having that check-in, that accountability. Accountability is a big word for our company. It's not always easy to have that conversation. But I think, yeah, now more than ever, with people working remotely, or at least, a good chunk of people still working remotely, you have to have those open, transparent conversations. So,
And I
yeah.
think if your policy is going to be, you know what, you got to come back to the office, be it 5 days, be it 2 days, whatever the case may be,
Mhm.
and somebody doesn't want to come back and they feel they are productive and you have data saying otherwise, I think there's got to be a grace period, right? So I think there's got to be, okay, if you want to continue working from home, this is the expectation.
Mhm.
And again, I'm just oversimplifying it here, but prove me wrong,
Yes.
right? And I'm not saying it's an ego thing. That's absolutely not what I'm saying. But you know what? I don't believe you're productive. This is what productivity looks like for me as a leader.
Yes.
Here's an opportunity. Now we're on the same page.
Mhm.
So then the individual knows, okay, yeah, right? Because
Yeah,
sometimes we're
exactly.
just so busy.
Yes.
And at the end of the day, we're like, what do we do? I'm guilty as hell of that at
Yeah.
times,
Oh, for sure.
right? You look at
Yeah.
it. So I think you can't just expect everybody to come back.
Yes.
And if they are there, where there is that rub, you've got to have some sort of program in place to allow the individual to meet the expectations, because that tells me your expectations weren't clear in the first place. But that's
Yeah.
by the by, right? That you can't do anything about that. It's about how
Yeah.
do you move forward.
Yeah.
But I kind of agree with you. I think it's a really, really slippery road by trying to enforce everybody to come back.
Yeah, it's difficult. And I mean, we talked about that yesterday. We're already seeing that all over LinkedIn, I'm leaving, I don't want to work for this company because, they're forcing everybody to come back. And, we're seeing obviously lots of movement. Every second post you see is I changed jobs. I
Yep.
moved over here. It's pretty crazy. So I do think companies need to be mindful. And so, yeah, to me, it comes down to having that regular check-in, making sure that, your team feels supported, that they know that you're available, even though you're not, it's like out of sight, out of mind. I may
Yep.
not physically be there, but I always try to reiterate, I'm a Teams message away, or phone me on my cell, or if I'm out, I'll let you know. And my calendar is very open. So everybody knows where I am at what time, and they know how to get a hold of me. So I think it's having that regular check-in and making sure that people feel supported is really
Yeah.
key.
And I think companies, when you are hiring, if if you are thinking, if you have office space, right,
Yes.
that you are committed to,
Right.
like a lot of us,
Yeah.
that's sat empty and you want to start using that and you're hiring people, I think you've got to say there is a chance you will be coming back to the office for 2 days. When
Yeah.
that happens, I don't know. I
Yeah.
think I really truly believe you cannot say, no, 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 we're going to stay hybrid. Hire today. Forget
Yes.
what's happened. If you're
Yeah.
making a hire today,
Yes, for sure.
you have to have made that decision. Are we fully remote, fully in the office, hybrid? If we're hybrid, what does that look like?
Mhm.
1 day, 2 days, whatever the case may be. I
Yeah.
think there's no excuse
Yes.
to today because all you're doing is continuing that problem. We've got to bring that problem to
Yeah.
an end.
Yeah,
We've got to
absolutely.
solution that. And
Yes.
everybody we're hiring from, well, I believe from before today, but today that decision's got to be made. And
Yeah.
if you as a leader have not been able to make that decision, that is a weakness on yourself as a leader,
Mhm. Yeah.
right? You got to
No,
make, because it's unfair hiring people and saying, look, yeah, we're remote, and then 2 weeks down the road, 2 months down the road, and actually you come back
oh,
to the office 2 days a
absolutely.
week,
Yeah, no,
right?
that's yeah, and that's not gonna be any way to keep employees for sure.
No, it's just going to churn and burn, right?
Yeah,
Just going to churn and burn.
absolutely.
Catherine, thank you ever so much. We could go on, but I'm just
You're most
really conscious of time.
welcome.
Um, really appreciate it. Any closing thoughts, comments that you want to make?
Yeah, I mean, I think that it boils down to communicating and, like you said, making decisions and not being afraid to try things. None of us, I mean, this is all new for all of us. We're all in the same boat. So there's going to be mistakes. Just because you decide today, as you said, we're going to be hybrid, doesn't mean that 6 months from now it's going to necessarily look we all know, having gone through this in the last couple of years, that the only constant is change. And so
Yeah,
I think
fair
it's
point.
about adapting and communicating and being really ultra transparent, uber transparent with your teams. And you can't over communicate. If you think you should probably be having a conversation rather than sending an email, have the conversation because people appreciate that. I've often had colleagues that say to me, "Why did you send me just, send me call me on Teams. I want to see your face." So, people
It's
people
true
want to
though.
people want to connect.
Yeah, when you think you've communicated, I think it was Craig Brown, CEO at Agilus, that said it on the CEO panel, and I'm paraphrasing, but totally 100% agree with what he said. When you think you've communicated, communicate again. You think you've
Exactly.
communicated enough, communicate again. Pretty sure it was Craig that said that, but it's so true.
Yeah,
It's so
absolutely.
true.
100%.
Listen, Catherine, thank you ever so much. Now, if anybody wants to get in touch with you, what's the best way to connect with you?
Connect with me on LinkedIn.
Perfect. Perfect. Well, guys,
Absolutely.
thanks ever so much.
Yeah.
And you know what? I will be back with
Excellent.
another live in a couple of weeks. I've got somebody in mind. We're just trying to tie down times. So I'm going to try start coming back to these lives on a regular basis. Catherine, thank you ever so much.
Thank you. Safe travels.
You're welcome. Thank you. Take
Thank
care.
you.